Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Sunday, January 14th. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Akron game is in 230 days. The game against Michigan in 321 days. The NFL draft declaration deadline is tomorrow, but for Ohio State, all that news is in the past. The Buckeyes brought back all of their draft-eligible underclassmen, except for Marvin Harrison and Mike Hall. So a lot of good news on that front that you've already heard all about. Now we're looking forward, and there's some good news for the Buckeyes. In the transfer portal, there's some good news potentially on the recruiting front as well, and there might be even more good news in the transfer portal maybe in the coming weeks. We're going to be talking about all that stuff today with our buddy Tony Gerdeman of BuckeyeHuddle.com. And Tony, I guess let's start with the transfer portal. The Buckeyes picked up a wide receiver in the transfer portal. It is a name that is going to be slightly familiar to Ohio State fans because he signed with Ohio State and played with Ohio State last year. His name is Bryson Rodgers. Tony, this was, I think, not exactly the transfer portal destination I was expecting for Bryson Rodgers, but this feels like a really big, potentially good, very good piece of news for Ohio State.
Yeah, and I think it comes off the heels of a recruiting trip, an official visit to the University of Florida for the Florida prospect. He played at Wiregrass Ranch High School in Zephyr Hills, originally from Warren, Ohio, though, Tom. I don't know if a lot of people know that. But yeah, I mean, obviously, once somebody enters the portal, you assume they're gone. We've seen players at other schools come back. I don't know if we've seen that yet at Ohio State until now. Bryson Rodgers announcing on Saturday that, hey, I'm back. And so this is a situation where we've talked about this. I don't know how many people have talked about this or understand it or realize it, but the Ohio State receiver room was pretty thin. It was from the last game, you lost essentially Marvin Harrison, Julian Fleming, Xavier Johnson, Noah Rodgers to the portal, Bryson Rodgers to the portal, and you only add maybe Mylan Graham and Jeremiah Smith, and only one of those guys is going to be in school in the spring and in the winter. So this is a pretty thin group. So to be able to add another Bryson Rodgers, played in 2 games, will still have 4 years of eligibility. And it's a guy that Brian Hartline obviously liked because he went out and signed him. And now he's back and is a versatile receiver, getting bigger, getting stronger. Back in August, he was 6'2", 185. You know, we can assume he's a little bit bigger now, a little stronger. And this is a guy that we've heard so much from his teammates about how good he is. We haven't gotten to see it in action in a game yet. But when, as we always say, when teammates talk about guys, you need to listen.
And I think this is a little bit of a watch what they do, don't just listen to what they say situation, because you've heard the right stuff about him for a while. And there was a stat about how he was the most efficient receiver on the roster at some point during the spring or the summer in terms of just everything that was thrown to him sort of got completed and got converted into something positive. It's easy to say that stuff and it's easy to, manipulate stats and whatever. But the fact that he went in the portal and then was welcomed back with open arms. This was not oh boy, you gotta, hey, maybe you should look at somewhere else. This was someone who thought maybe, there's not a super clear path to the playing field, but Ohio State was interested in bringing him back. That tells you a lot about how they view Bryson Rodgers. So you're sort of hearing it, but you're also seeing it there as well. Certainly someone who I think is going to be in the mix for playing time. I don't know if I'm expecting him to start this year, but if you're in that top 4, 5, maybe even 6, in that wide receiver room, there are opportunities to play, and I would certainly expect Bryson Rodgers to have a real significant opportunity to play this year now that he is back. Now, some more news. Dominic Kirks, he's a defensive end out of Northeast Ohio, Ohio State. He's a member of the class of 2024. He's been committed to Washington since last summer, but he didn't sign on early signing day. Ohio State brought him in for an unofficial visit last fall for at least one of the games, and didn't make a real push for him, didn't offer him. You're kind of waiting, like, where's the offer? Why haven't they offered him? Then they jumped in right before early signing day. That was enough to get him to delay his decision, did not sign with Washington on early signing day. Then after Kalen DeBoer, the Washington head coach, headed to Alabama to replace Nick Saban, Dominic Kirks ended up deciding, I'm going to decommit from Washington, visiting Ohio State this weekend on an official visit. Tony, with as much as Ohio State has struggled to close on some of the defensive end prospects they've had, at sort of their top of their list the last couple years, this feels like this would be after hanging on to Edric Houston on early signing day, this feels like this would be a really big addition to the 2024 class.
Yeah, and a lot of times the February editions are, it's a bonus, but then the bonus becomes, Nicholas Petit-Frere, or somebody that starts for you and produces, and it's more than a bonus. It becomes a necessity and a key piece. And with the way the defensive line recruiting has gone the last couple of years, they need as many guys as they can get. And this is a composite 251st player in the nation, number 33 defensive lineman. This is not it's ranked 992nd reach in the nation, and, we just need to fill out the roster. This is more than that. And this is a guy with legitimate offers, and now, could add to an Ohio State defensive line room that needs to bring in as many guys as possible in the next 2 years, because they are going to be losing some guys after this coming season. And so if you have guys that, whether he redshirts, whether he would redshirt as a true freshman or what, just getting people into the program right now that have talent. And with Dominic Kirks, also have versatility. He's a big guy. He's 6'4", 250, 260, somewhere in that range. Could be a defensive end, could be a 3-tech, could be, in past guys, you're talking like Adolphus Washington, Jayshon Cornell, guys that Draymond Jones, you don't necessarily know what they're going to be until maybe their second or third year in the system. And sometimes they have to fluctuate. Like John Simon came to Ohio State as a defensive tackle, ended up as a defensive end. Draymond Jones came to Ohio State as an injured defensive end, grew into a defensive tackle. Jayshon Cornell went from end to tackle to end. And the versatility is a huge value for a defensive line that may fluctuate in what they want to do in terms of 3 down linemen, 4 down linemen. When you've got a guy that can play both, like a Dominic Kirks could, that gives you some flexibility in how you want to approach the overall aspect of your defense.
So Dominic Kirks could be a very positive addition for the Ohio State defense this month if they can end up lending a commitment and then a signature from him on National Signing Day in early February. That might not be the only potential addition they could still bring in during the month of January. Transfer portal season is over, except you had to enter the transfer portal by 5 days after your bowl game was played, except if your head coach leaves, then the transfer portal is open for 30 days. Well, guess what? Nick Saban just retired. That means it is open season on the Alabama roster, with Kalen DeBoer departing Washington. It means it is now open season on the Washington roster as well. There are several big names on the Alabama roster that are not in the portal yet, but that are certainly of interest to Ohio State folks. Probably none more than Caleb Downs, the freshman safety who was a serious contender to sign with Ohio State before ultimately ending up at Alabama. Tony, there's a lot of moving parts here in terms of Caleb Downs' recruitment and the retirement of Nick Saban, and Caleb Downs' position coach just switched schools, and then Kalen DeBoer is coming into Alabama. Where does this all stand right now? Sort of give everyone an update on what's going on with Caleb Downs.
Well, when Ohio State was recruiting Caleb Downs, there was a school of thought that was Ohio State was the place he wanted to be, but Alabama was the place he ended up. And so it was a tough decision for him to say no to Ohio State. So when now we're at the era of the transfer portal, when head coaches leave, you often see guys jump into the portal and go find somewhere else to be. And a lot of times you initially think, well, who finished second? And maybe that is because ends up being where they go. But we've seen it from Ohio State in the past where they missed on some guys initially, maybe finished second, maybe finished third. Antoine Jackson went Ohio State in the 2015 class, came down to like Ohio State and Auburn, chose to go to Auburn, then ended up at Blinn Junior College before finally signing with Ohio State. Tywan Malone was somebody that Ohio State was hard after, and he ended up going to Ole Miss and then plays baseball, plays football, and then transfers to Ohio State. And I think we talked to Larry Johnson a while back, and maybe even Tony Alford about this as well, in terms of you still, even when you lose out on guys, you're still like not necessarily in contact, but you leave on good terms because you never know who's going to come back, especially now more than ever. And we've seen guys from smaller schools who put their foot in the door because, yeah, I know you're not going to sign with me now, but you might sign with me in a year or two when you're in the portal. So it just creates this other avenue of recruiting. And, as long as there are still relationships there, you kind of go and attack them.
And relationships obviously important, which is one of the reasons why it is worth noting Alabama's safeties coach, Travaris Robinson, just went from Alabama to Georgia as the co-defensive coordinator and safeties coach there. So now there's a little bit of a relationship there as well, because he was, of course, Caleb Downs' position coach at Alabama. So one more factor that's going to end up going into this decision with Caleb Downs. Does he enter the portal? And if so, where does he end up? Would certainly be a big addition for Ohio State if they could land him, but you're at least 2 ifs away right now from that potentially happening. So that'll be one of the stories we keep following for you this week at BuckeyeHuddle.com, along with the Dominic Kirks story, along with the Buckeyes' other potential targets in the transfer portal, along with the assistant coach searches that are going on. Boy, it is a busy, busy time. It has been a very positive couple weeks around the Ohio State football program. The mood has seemed to completely do a 180. After that Cotton Bowl, it seemed like they were headed into a bleak direction. And boy, all those guys coming back for 2024, that has certainly swung the momentum and swung the atmosphere around the program, around the fan base, and potentially more additions to come as we head into winter workouts and spring football. That is all coming very soon, and you're going to want to be at BuckeyeHuddle.com for all of it. Tony and Kevin and I covering the team. Mark staying very, very busy on the recruiting beat. And then Ross and Mickey and Justin and Devin all covering the X's and O's, making you a smarter football fan, all on our huddle board presented by Jeff Ruby Steakhouse, all at BuckeyeHuddle.com. That will do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We will talk to you tomorrow.